Hey everyone, it's Wednesday on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got Ray Fittipaldo on, and while we will get back to the Steelers' activities at OTAs, we got to talk about the rumors about who they're targeting with potential trades and free agency. Jonnu Smith being brought back up. How real is that? We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as Minka Fitzpatrick's plans for the secondary and Cole Holcomb being back, a big part of what the linebackers can do. All here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it.
You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter.
Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers writers. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Do you know they also help with workers' compensation? Be sure to call them today at 1-800-94-EDGAR because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about the rumor mill that got spinning yesterday. And really, it's been spinning for a little bit over like more than half a week now, since the end of last week. But that's the Steelers have reported doubled their interest or re-entered their interest in Jonnu Smith, the Dolphins tight end. This, of course, coming from Adam Schefter, who initially reported it. But Ray, we said this when it happened, when this report came out. I think Brian and I brought it up. Jonnu Smith does not feel like a great fit for what the Steelers need right now. They do need another playmaker in their offense, but they've got two tight ends that they feel confident about in Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. They need another wide receiver,
right?
And maybe this is coming from not Omar Khan or the Steelers or anywhere from there.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it in one sense. Like maybe you don't get a number two receiver, but then you just double down and you play three tight ends a lot, but to your point, Chris, that just doesn't compute because I don't see the Steelers getting away from wanting to be a physical football team. And are you going to take snaps away from Darnell Washington, who was a really good run blocker for you last year? Are you going to take snaps away from Pat Freiermuth, whom you just paid a big contract out to last season? He's only entering the second year of that contract now. So you would have to pretty much scrap your offense and learn how to deploy three tight ends pretty much as your base offense. And I just don't see that happening. Maybe we're proven wrong in all of this, but the way I see it is a number two receiver, a true starter opposite DK Metcalf is probably the biggest need for this offense right now.
I'm right with you on that. I think it's still wide receiver that needs to be addressed. But again, looking at this, Ray, I get that there's some logic. I think I can kind of see the correlation as far as how this got back out there and what was done. When you look at the Steelers and hey, Jonnu Smith could be interested. The Steelers obviously have a tie that can be brought to Jonnu Smith with Arthur Smith, his offensive coordinator back when Arthur was with Tennessee, and then of course again when he traded for him with the Falcons, and there were connections there. But this comes as more of like the Jonnu Smith just had what were franchise records for a Dolphins tight end last year, and he wants a new contract. He's 30 years old. His agent Drew Rosenhaus wants to put the pressure on him, but how much pressure can they apply? So let's bring in these trade talks. Let's say the other teams are interested. Let's try to ramp things up. I think that's kind of where this is coming from right now, and that's oftentimes when you get those leaks and those sources. Sometimes they come from the team. Sometimes they come from someone close to the team. Sometimes they come from agents trying to do their jobs as far as getting the attention for their players. And I don't think there's much really behind what the Steelers actually having an interest to trade for Jonnu Smith. Because again, like, what are you going to do? Pay this guy $4.8 million this year, re-sign him to the new deal that he supposedly wants that's more than that next year? Like, I just don't see that working here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, from that perspective, Chris, just how do you deploy three tight ends when you have like Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington that you already want? But the second part of this is the business aspect. And I think Pat Freiermuth's contract averages around $12 million a year. Jonnu Smith, probably going to want, if he wants a raise off of what he's making now, he's probably going to want $6 or $7 million. Can you really afford to have two tight ends who are making, close to $20 million a year between them? I understand Darnell Washington is on a rookie contract, and there might be some questions about whether you resign him, but to me, it just doesn't make sense from a business perspective as well. So actually, before that report broke yesterday, there was the report about Gabe Davis, and Gabe Davis coming in, for a visit and presumably a physical as well. He was released from the Jaguars last month with, an injury designation. So, I think a lot of teams will be looking at a guy like that, Chris. I think, with the Bills, I understand he was, with a really good quarterback, but he put up numbers, and that's the type of guy I think the Steelers would probably target in free agency now. And the best thing about that is there's no contract issues. He's getting paid $11.5 million from the Jaguars this season. The Steelers can sign him for like $1.1 million. It would be the Russell Wilson situation all over again. So that one makes sense also from a football and a business perspective.
No, I agree. I think Gabe Davis makes a lot more sense. You're not giving up any draft compensation for him. You're not paying him some huge deal. You're probably giving him close to a vet minimum contract for at least 1 year. It gives you the room to experiment. And in that way, like, here's the other thing about that. They get Gabe Davis. He immediately comes in. He can, be your number 2 guy, whatever. They still could go get another wide receiver at some point because they'll have given nothing up to get him. So, like, if Gabe Davis isn't the guy, if he's at least like helping out with the competition with Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin, and you could still go get that guy later. And I think that's why they're going to bring him in on Thursday and why that makes sense. And again, just the Jonnu Smith thing, the interesting timing of the whole of it coming back up. It came back up just hours after Donald Parham, the Steelers Steelers tight end, was put on. Was noted to have an Achilles injury. We reported that, and when that comes out, and then all of a sudden there's they're reinterested. Let's put 2 and 2 together, then let the dominoes like stack themselves. But the Steelers, why would the Steelers go after a number 1 tight end to pair with their already number 1 tight end because they lost their 4th or 5th tight end in OTAs? Like, I get Drew Rosenhaus got a job to do, but and I get people got to report what they got to report, but those things just do not add up. Gabe Davis absolutely does.
Yeah, and Parham, there's no guarantee, Chris, this, that he was going to be on the 53-man roster in September anyway. They have to replace Michael Pruitt. I understand that. Pruitt played a fair number of snaps last year, but I don't know that Parham was a shoo-in to fill that role, or, like I said, to fill, a different role on this football team. So, going back to Gabe Davis for 1 minute here.
Sure.
One other reason this makes sense, and this might be overlooked, if you look at the number 2s they've had the last couple of years, Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson, bigger body guys who aren't afraid to mix it up as a run blocker. Gabe Davis also fits that role. He's known as being a deep threat, but he's a bigger body guy. I think he would fit in that role as a run blocker as well. I know they like Roman Wilson, and we know Calvin Austin is going to have a role on this team as well. But just knowing how much they used Van Jefferson last year and the way they used him in their run packages, again, it would make sense for Gabe Davis or a guy like him, a guy who doesn't mind blocking, to be that free agent who eventually comes the Steelers' way.
Agreed entirely there. It makes a lot more sense when you look at that. We'll see if that develops. He's supposedly supposed to be visiting the Steelers on Thursday. Will that lead to him signing? We'll find out later. But we got to take a quick break. When we come back, Minka Fitzpatrick talked yesterday. I thought it was interesting the things that he said about how the defense wants to fix their problems from last year. We'll talk about that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They also do workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, you need to know who decides when you're better, who decides when your treatment's over, and who decides when your benefits are over. The answer is someone that isn't on your side. That's the insurance company's doctors. They won't be on your side. Get someone who will be, and that's Edgar Snyder Associates. Call them today, 1-800-94-EDGAR, because they'll fight for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. Again, call Edgar Snyder Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about what Minka Fitzpatrick said yesterday. Wrote about this in the story for today called Leave No Gray. And I thought it was interesting the way that he talked about this, Ray, when he said, football is a black and white game. We when it comes to execution, there shouldn't be any gray about what our communication is. When we do something, if I give you a thumbs up, you should give a thumbs up back. If I give you a thumbs down, you give me a thumbs down back. And he's like, if you're not doing what we're doing, then you don't need to be a part of this. It seemed like Minka Fitzpatrick was getting across that, hey, we're not having the mistakes that we had last year. And look, there were a lot of newer faces last year. Cam Sutton was coming back from the Lions. Dante Jackson was there. Beanie Bishop was a rookie. They brought in different guys here and there. But this is a year, and Deshaun Elliott was new at the time. This is a year, though, I think the Steelers have an opportunity in their secondary, especially with their new coach, Gerald Alexander, to maybe shore up some things and make sure that they aren't having those communication problems we saw that especially poked their heads out late in the season.
Yeah, Chris, it's one thing to get beat physically in a one-on-one matchup situation. It's quite another when the opposing team's receivers and tight ends are running wide open throughout your secondary, and these quarterbacks can just play easy pitch and catch, for touchdown. We saw that in the Chiefs game on Christmas Day, right? How wide open was Travis Kelce on his touchdown?
Mm-hmm.
To bring Minkah and the communication back into play here. You remember Minkah was beaten to the flat on a touchdown in that game too. Now, we don't know, was that Minkah simply getting beat, or was he supposed to have help out there, in terms of, somebody else supporting him, before he can get over there and make that tackle. So, I don't know why it was such a big issue last season. I'm sure the new faces had something to do with it, Chris, but for that stuff to go on all season over the course of 18 games, if you count the playoff game in Baltimore, that's just unacceptable. You can't have that. And, we've heard Patrick Queen talk about the Steelers cleaning up, some of the schematic details that failed them last year. That's great. You should be doing that now, but why wasn't that done last December and last January? That's the question that hangs over Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin this offseason. It took far too long to fix, in my opinion. You can't play football that way and hope to be a contender in the playoffs.
No, it was a big problem, and it's something that they addressed. And look, these things happen. It's also why, when people say you want change, guess which two position coaches are gone this year? The linebackers and the defensive backs. And Gerald Alexander being brought back with the Steelers. Now, he was the assistant defensive backs coach under Grady Brown. It was interesting. I've now talked to Joey Porter Jr., and Corey Trice and Beanie Bishop. And it's interesting hearing from Porter and Trice because they were in Pittsburgh as rookies when Gerald Alexander was an assistant coach. And they were like, oh, no, having him back is great. We liked him. And so he, of course, went away for a year to be the Raiders secondary coach. Now he's the Steelers defensive backs coach, so kind of getting a promotion there. And one thing I've heard from them, one thing I've heard from Minka Fitzpatrick is he is very stern about what he expects is what he expects. Grady Brown, all credit to him for what he did in his career and the things that he was able to accomplish. But it seems like he was more of a laid back, like, hey, we're going to address this back in the film room. We'll do this. Gerald Alexander don't got time for that. He's the guy that's going to say, if you're not doing what I'm telling you to do, we're going to address this right here and now. We could see that in practice during the open session where we can take footage of guys and how they're working. And to me, Ray, when I look at things like that, I see like, okay, maybe there's a chance for a better tone to be struck from the position coach standpoint that could lead to better results.
Yeah, even yesterday I was watching practice and the defense had a down period. There wasn't much going on, but Minka Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, and Gerald Alexander were walking through plays, just scenarios that where they had the pass off receivers or where they expected receivers to be. So It's good that they're on their details this early. Like I said, something had to change from last season. You can't change all the players. I know they changed a few, so when that happens, inevitably, it comes down to changing coaches. And I'm with you. I thought Grady is and was a good football coach, but sometimes you just need a different voice in there. And we all know Alexander is a more authoritative voice. So if it takes him kicking some butt to get some results, he's not going to be afraid to make that happen.
And I think there's an interesting mix of guys that he could do that with here when you're talking about the players that they have in the room, right? Minkah Fitzpatrick, Deshaun Elliott, by all measures, I think good safeties for the Steelers to have back there. Then they're veterans that don't know what they're doing. Darius Slay, I asked Minkah Fitzpatrick about Darius Slay. He's like, having a guy like that is extremely valuable because he can cover a side of the field and we don't have to worry about a whole lot over there. And then you have your young guys like Joey Porter Jr., like Corey Trice Jr., like Beanie Bishop Jr. There's too many juniors on this team. But when you talk about those guys, because Darius Slay is also a junior, is this the secondary of juniors? It's driving me nuts. But when you look at those guys, there's that mix of young guys that could be the future. Like when we talked to Corey Trice yesterday, he was like, I'm ready to be the guy. Like he's talking about like people don't know how good I'm gonna be. And Corey Trice is the future next to Joey Porter Jr. future. That could be something that's set up long term. So I think Gerald Alexander has an interesting group on his hands where he has guys who can contribute right now and guys who he could develop into long-term, staying players for the Steelers defense.
Yeah, I don't doubt that Corey Trice, that the Steelers like him in his skill set, but the reason Slay is here is because Corey Trice's injury history. But it is a very attractive thing, to have guys who are talented in that secondary, because I think a lack of depth really has hurt this team in the past. And let's say there's an injury to Joey Porter or to Slay, then you have a Corey Trice who can step in and, potentially be a guy who can, be a starter right away and then not miss a beat. So that's always nice to have, but it's especially nice to have when one of your starters, a guy you just signed to a 1-year contract. I think Slay is 33, 34 years old. You're going to need a good backup behind him just because of his age. And we all know older players eventually break down. You hope it doesn't happen to Slay this year, but we all know that's a possibility.
It's always a possibility. You got to plan for it, and just injuries in general. There's a chance Joey Porter Jr. can go down for a little bit. There's always those possibilities. But I think the bottom line here is that the Steelers. We covered it there when Deshaun Elliott was like, guys are wide, bleep it open. Like, he said that after that Chiefs game when Travis Kelce scored that touchdown that was wide open, and you could see there was frustration and there was guys, kind of pointing the finger, but not pointing the finger at certain players like Cam Sutton. But now they've gotten those guys out. Can those players be answers for the Steelers this year? Can their adjustments that they're putting together actually yield positive results in the secondary? Those are things we can't see until the actual season shows up, but that will be a big part of this year if they're able to accomplish it. If the secondary does clean up those things, then there could be something there. But like we've been saying, they got to fix the run defense. They got to fix this part. They're able to do those things. It can change where the Steelers are as a defense. Because again, the Steelers defense wasn't terrible last year. They had some big breakdowns in some of their more important games, but they still finished 8th in scoring last year. So imagine what they'll be able to do if they do accomplish these things that they're working on right now.
Yeah, I would say their biggest problem last year, massive breakdowns at inopportune times.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know when that happened, late in the season, during that 5-game losing streak. A good defense all season, yes, but they looked really bad at the end.
And they can't afford to have that this time of year. And the best thing that they can do right now is to make sure that those problems are ironed out here in the spring so that when they're hitting training camp, they're hitting the ground running. We'll talk about other facets of that defense, and that's Cole Holcomb and this linebacker unit. You might not remember Cole Holcomb because he didn't play last year. In fact, he hasn't played in over a year and a half because of an injury. But Ray got a chance to talk to him, and we got a chance to go over what he was talking about and how he's ready to get back in the action and what he might be able to do for the entire linebacker unit and what they might be able to do together that could be unique in 2025. That's next here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, remind you, the show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. If you're looking for a way to challenge your body and sharpen your mind, step into something more than just a workout. Welcome to the brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy at UFC Gym. Here, it's not just about training, it's about living the values of honor, discipline, and respect. Whether you're a total beginner or leveling up your skills, you'll be guided through a structured program led by a third-degree black belt instructor who builds confidence, strength, flexibility, and real technique. Head down to the UFC gym at the Waterfront or Market Square to learn more about the exclusive 3-month introductory package today. That's only at UFC Gym Pittsburgh. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, I wrote about Minka Fitzpatrick for this morning. You wrote about Cole Holcomb yesterday. And listen, it's interesting because when Cole Holcomb was signed to the Steelers, he was signed with the intentions of he could be potentially their Patrick Queen back in 2023. And, of course, he suffered an injury in the middle of the season that took him out. It was wondering if he'd ever make it back. Now he's working back with the Steelers. What did you glean from talking to him and our chance to get, to finally get to him as a player and what he expects to be this year for the Steelers?
Yeah, well, first of all, going back to the end of last season, we just got done talking about the defense breaking down. Cole was actually practicing with the Steelers in late December and early January. He said he could have come back at that point, but he said maybe it wouldn't have been the best idea. So clearly he was working his way back at that point. But Chris, you're out there watching these OTAs like me. He's moving around really well. Now, I don't know how that knee is going to hold up over time, but he looks pretty good to me out there just running around in shorts. He doesn't look out of place out there like he's lost a step or anything like that. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in training camp and in the preseason games. It's hard to come back from those types of injuries, though. I referenced Jalen Smith, the former Cowboys linebacker, in my story. He had that devastating knee injury at Notre Dame. He went from being a top 5 pick to being an early second-round pick. And he really never was the same player he was at Notre Dame again. I think the unfortunate thing for Cole Holcomb is, and, Smith ended up playing 7 years in the NFL. With Cole, he's dealing with this injury when he's 29 years old, right? So he's not a young guy who can come back from that type of an injury. The body changes when you get close to 30. So I hope it works out for him. But as you mentioned, the Steelers have backfilled that position with Patrick Queen, Payton Wilson the last couple of years. It's a much different situation now than it was when Cole signed a couple of years ago.
And that was the one question I had for Cole Holcomb that I thought was really interesting that he brought up. He said, hey, we have a good group of guys that can all be on the field at the same time. Patrick Queen, him, and Payton Wilson, all 3 guys who can play the run, play the pass, go sideline to sideline with athleticism and agility and being physical. And that's something that I don't think the Steelers have had for a while, is a group of guys that can do that. And then you still have other guys like Malik Harrison, who maybe not as good in coverage, but he is a big body who's going to be able to come and help against the run. And again, this kind of goes into this might be the Steelers have put investments into figure out the things that kind of plagued them in 2024, whether it's the communication issues in the secondary, whether it's strength on the defensive line and youth on the defensive line, or whether it's having a full packed out linebacker room where they have depth there, and that could be an advantage to the Steelers when they get there. I also wonder how much like the Jalen Smith injury that happened back in 2016, right? So that's that was 7 years from where Cole Holcomb's had. Maybe science has developed, or trainers have developed different things that happen. And listen, that stuff moves very fast. The things that were last year that trainers did, they've developed things to be better at. So maybe Cole Holcomb benefits from being in, maybe not later in his career, but just later in time where methods have been developed by doctors and trainers to help his recovery. But either way, his recovery could be a big thing for the Steelers simply because he can be a third option. We're presuming Payton Wilson might be the starter next to Patrick Queen at linebacker. But if he could be that third option that rotates with them and keeps a presence on the field that can help against the run and the pass at the same time.
Yeah, listen, I wrote last week they're taking a long look at Payton Wilson this spring as a base defense inside linebacker, but that's not etched in stone. It could very easily be Cole Holcomb or Malik Harrison who eventually earns that role as a rundown run stopping inside linebacker. So lots has to play out here in training camp and the preseason games. But the nice thing, Chris, is they do have options, and they got good options behind them. That's that's always important. One thing going back to the injury, Cole doesn't like to give details on the injury. We still don't know the extent of what happened. Like Jalen Smith had nerve damage in addition to multiple ligament tears. The only thing we truly know about Cole is he had multiple ligament tears. And the one thing he did disclose about the rehab was the doctors told him up front, like, listen, if you don't get after this and you don't do this the right way, your career could end. And, for Cole, he took that to heart. A lot of the guys who have surgery, rehab away from the team, Cole was here constantly last year working with the Steelers trainers and their doctors. So, Minka Fitzpatrick talked about it yesterday. He's been very impressed with his dedication. So if there's one guy who can come back from this, and maybe a guy who comes back from this successfully, it looks like Cole is the guy who might be able to do that.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, that was another thing Minka Fitzpatrick said. He's been working ever since he's been injured, talking about how, he looks even more in shape than he did before he was injured. And I think that's a testament to Cole Holcomb not giving up on his career, not giving up on himself. And again, like, hey, listen, the Steelers aren't expecting him to be the guy anymore. Like when he was first signed, he was part of a new linebacker crew with Landon Roberts and Quan Alexander, who as a unit was supposed to be all different. But now he's expected to just be a part of the machine, a cog of the machine, where I think that could make it easier for his recovery when he does get back into the game, so that he's not playing, 80 snaps or anything like that. He could play maybe like 20, 30, 40, somewhere around that range. If the Steelers are on defense a lot. And again, like if he's just another veteran presence out there, that's another guy who's been in their system for a few years now, who knows what they're expecting. Maybe there's some factors there that can work for them to be a better whole defense, like we've been talking about with Minkah Fitzpatrick and their additions on the defensive line as well.
Yeah, one thing that struck me, Chris, as I sat down to write that story yesterday was how quickly things change in the NFL, right? Like Cole was coming off his first contract in Washington, signed a nice deal. I think he was averaging like $6 or $7 million a year on that deal he signed. Gets hurt like a half a season into that contract, and instead of he was 27 then, now he's 29 in the last year of his contract, and it's almost like he has to prove himself again. He's got to prove that he can come back from this injury first and foremost, and then he has to prove to whoever he plays for next year, whether it's the Steelers or another team, that he could be a starter, that he could even be a contributor. So it's funny. This NFL business is brutal in a lot of ways, and I think that injury to Cole really illustrates that.
It certainly is. We'll see how his journey continues as he tries to get back to playing in game. OTAs continue today. We'll see what happens there with Gabe Davis scheduled to visit tomorrow. Will we see any new Steelers arrive at OTAs? Will we see Gabe Davis get signed? Keep it here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the North Shore Drive podcast for all your updates on the Pittsburgh Steelers. From Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, thanks again for tuning into the North Shore Drive podcast. A reminder, you can get this on all your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back here Friday with more on the North Shore Drive podcast, but stay tuned later today for another episode, another update from OTAs. We'll see you here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.